time in Colorado.
Oh, absolutely. So if you were on the chat last week, big snowstorm, lots of heavy, wet, break your back snow that had to be shoveled. And now it's all gone. And within a few days, it was back into the 60s, and it's going to be another gorgeous day here in Colorado. One of the things that we love to do on the chat, and Austin and I are both here in Colorado. I'm in Loveland, and Austin's down more in the metro area, the sophisticated suburbanite that he is. One of the things that we love to do here on the chat is let us know where in the world you are joining us from, because it's always absolutely amazing to me. And Tim is a roaming dude. He's always, so he's in Indiana now. So it looks like Tim's out on the road. Hopefully you get to go back home today. Allie, good morning. Nice. Glad you were able to join us here, Allie. And so we love to kind of check in on what everybody's doing. One of the things that you'll notice about here on the chat is this is not a lecture. This is not, us telling you what you need to do on the shalls and shoulds. This is sharing information, because food safety is not a point of competition. We're all working on the same things, even though we may work for different companies. And with food safety, it's always to the benefit of everyone if we share information. And so today's going to be a really cool one, because Austin is working on a really, really fun project. So I will tease that a little bit for everybody. But before we get started, everybody please join Austin and I for a drink of your favorite beverage. Cheers.
Cheers.
Very nice. Very nice. And Noodle's in his bed. Always a good thing. When Noodle's quiet, yeah, all is well. So, gosh, let's dive in. That was a nice, quick intro. So, good morning.
Yeah, there's a lot to cover.
Yes. So, one of the things that we're living in, we're all very aware of this, Austin, is that the world has really, really changed in like the last 5 years. How we get information, what that information is, and also, do we trust that information? And I think a lot of people are figuring out, just because something is said or something is printed or something is put in a YouTube video doesn't mean it's true. There are people out there who are putting out things that may not necessarily be true, or it may be slanted in a particular way. And I think that bias, in a lot of ways, is just part of human nature. People may not even be aware that they're doing it. And we know when you're scrolling through Twitter or whatever, doing these type of things, the things that get the clicks are the headlines that are sensational, right? So-and-so demolishes X in this debate. And you're like, ooh, right? And because that's what they want, right? They want that click. They want the advertisement revenue. Everything is designed psychologically to get you to hit that button and view those advertisements. And I think in a lot of ways, it's caused a lot of pessimism. I mean, especially in me, right? I'll look at things now, and my first reaction is, okay, is it real? Is it not? Right? It's really turning us into a bunch of skeptics, isn't it?
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, that's a great kind of tee up to the conversation, because as we're talking about education around food, right? There's been a lot of sensationalized media over the past 20 years, most of which has been very negative in nature around the food industry, which is problematic, in many different ways. I mean, it's good that there's information coming out around educating consumers around what some of the potential risks are within food, but also taking it to that extreme also leads to this like cognitive dissonance in like how we perceive food, right? This thing that we need multiple times a day for survival, but yet it continually is painted as this dangerous, risky poison, that you might be consuming. And so, yeah, that's I think it's proper time for a alternative story to kind of come out, because and I've been talking to a lot of people about the film, specifically Poisoned, this past year, because that was a big one that came out, and getting people's perceptions around how did they feel about the film, did they what did they like about it, what did they dislike about it, and I went and Googled, I just typed in food safety documentaries the other day, and read what's called the log line for each of the films that automatically populated when I did that. So I'll read these off real quick because there's a common theme here. Poisoned summary, everything you need to know. The documentary unwraps the stomach churning flaws in America's food industry. Food Inc., which came out a few years ago, an unflattering look inside America's corporate controlled food industry. And then The Trouble with Chicken is another one that popped up. Documentary on the spread of dangerous pathogens in our poultry and why the food safety system isn't stopping the threat. Dum dum dum. So when I look up food safety documentary, everything is talking about how unsafe our food is. And so when I was out in a lot of these conferences this year, I was asking people, what did you think of this film? And there was a lot of people who were saying, man, we've dedicated our lives to public health, and this film basically kind of makes us all look like we're a bunch of slackers not doing our job, or that we're corrupt in some way. Yeah. And so the conversation came up of, wouldn't it be great if there's some type of alternative story? And I started interviewing some people a couple of months ago when I got back from Dubai in the food safety conference out there, to find out, what are the specific things within Poisoned that you feel didn't meet the mark? And would love to hear from people in the comments as well, right? Since this is a conversation. What did you think of, either Poisoned or Food Inc. or any of the other food safety documentaries that you've seen over the past 10 years or so? So like some of the comments that came up around Poison was, over dramatized, right? Or that it lacked substance, right? It didn't have an actual, here's what you can do. Right. And this is pretty typical for most documentaries. And this is, as a filmmaker and as an educator, this is one of the things that bothers me about documentaries, is that they get you all riled up about a certain topic. And then it's like, there's no call to action. It's like, well, I guess write your congressman, right? Or don't eat romaine lettuce anymore. Stay away from cantaloupe. Those aren't really solutions. I think a lot of these food documentaries also don't take a global view, right? They focus on North America, because that's where a lot of the audience is for sensationalized media is in North America.
Like what Duncan says here, right? 5 ways lettuce can kill you. Details at 10 o'clock, right? It's when you're watching the news, it's not, hey, everything is okay. Join us at 10 for good news, right? No, that never happened.
Right. Yeah. So there definitely, there hasn't been very good representation, for the food safety side of the industry within consumers. And so I think it's time that we kind of told a different story here.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, part of this is, and I think the weakness in the system is people who are working on food safety and doing the right thing. As we talk about here in the chat, food safety is expected. And when you work in food safety and quality assurance, Austin, success it's assumed, and the consumers expect that as well. And anytime there's a mistake, it's, oh, well, we had a quality problem or things like this. And I know, as being an executive in the food industry for a long time, is when a big event happens, you see the big event. So recall so-and-so, class 1, 500,000 pounds, and all those headlines, and then it goes away. And to your point, you never see the resolution. What I would do is I would call around to my different connections behind the scenes and say, well, what happened at that company? Do we know yet? And that informal mode of communication to try and figure out what happened. Number one, I wanted to know. So if it impacted my company, I could figure out a way to prevent it from happening. But it was never communicate it. That's kind of like the classic example is what Tylenol did, right? Oh, hey, we've had this tampering incident. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's the preventive controls we put in place, right? We have these new seals on all the bottles now, which we still have to this day.
Right.
And we're sorry that this happened. Those type of issues where the company comes out and talks about and is transparent and then institutes those corrective actions. To your point, 100%, right? Their companies are just like, oh, please go away. Right? We just want to get rid of this as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so I mean, so it's kind of like tee up the project that I'm working on. Brian, if you want to tee up the that video that I sent over, and we'll kind of talk about what this is and where we're going here. So basically, there was.
Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, so long story short, I talked to a lot of people at these conferences. I reached out to a lot of my network over the past couple of months and said, what would you want to see as a alternative film to some of these ones that have really kind of just highlighted the food safety failures. And as we've started to map that out, have come up with this idea to do a 60-minute documentary that basically tells, here are the advancements that have been made over the past 20 years. Here's the people that are doing the work to keep us safe. These are the companies, these are the governments, the regulators. This is what happens behind the scenes to provide safe food, 99.9% of the time, right? The vast majority of what we eat is safe. So we kind of just showed this brief trailer, kind of explain a little bit more about that.
Nice. Well, and like you had said earlier, this is telling the other side of the story, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Telling our story.
Exactly. So let me click on play here, guys. We tested this earlier, so this should work. If you can't hear the sound, let us know in the comments.
Recently, the food industry has been the target of movies that paint a harrowing picture of food safety. It's time to reclaim the narrative. Sage Media is producing a 60-minute documentary to highlight food safety innovations and celebrate the companies and people who keep us safe. Made for a food safety audience, our film provides tools and resources to solve real-world problems, demonstrating the roles each industry and department plays in every facet of food safety. But we need your help. We are looking for financial sponsors and companies willing to share stories and best practices that will inspire other food professionals and show the breadth and complexity of food production. Schedule a call today to learn more about sponsorship levels and how you can participate in leaving a lasting legacy for the food industry. Recently, the food industry has been
little after there. Well, Noodle definitely had an opinion on it, didn't he?
Yeah.
You're barking.
Noodle dog. So that's kind of the brief overview of what we're looking to do. And the working title we're looking at right now is Nourished. So it's kind of the flip side of Poison. Mm-hmm. And then creating a story, really, as we look at what do we want to do different. If we had the chance to create this story in the way that we want, what would we do? And I think the first thing is that we want to tell a global story, right? Our food supply is not local, regional, or sometimes even from the same country that we reside in. And like I said, a lot of these previous films have really focused on North America specifically. So I want to create a global story that talks about not only where is food produced, but how does it get to us, right? And how is it transported? How is it distributed? How is it stored? And the different technologies that are used to protect that throughout that entire supply chain. You can pull up that other slide there, Brian.
Yeah. So just go down here.
No, just the slides that I sent over to you.
Okay. Gotcha.
There we go. So yeah, so in creating this type of story, we want to cover a large portion of the food supply chain. So if we're looking at a 60-minute film, we're looking at breaking it up into like 5 chapters or 5 modules. And the reason I'm referring to it as modules is because at Sage Media, we don't only just produce films, but we create learning curriculum. And so much of what we do is really around food safety culture. How do we drive critical thinking? How do we engage people in goal setting around food safety? And so that's one of my big things as well is not only creating a film, but creating a curriculum that goes along with it. So within this food continuum, if we say, okay, we're going to do a 60-minute film, right? I want to break it up into 5 modules. And each module will cover a different aspect of the kind of the supply chain. So we'll start with agriculture, move into manufacturing, and then transportation / distribution, retail or grocery, and then finally into food service, and be able to showcase, here are the potential risks that we face within each of these sectors, and then here are the people and the organizations and the technologies that are utilized, or the processes that protect us, and show that in a way so that people can start to connect the dots and see, okay, I can see how this company's HACCP program protects them in this certain way. Maybe there's something we can learn from that and pull into our own program, or here's their GMPs and how we can do that. Obviously GFSI, there's a lot of, different ways that you can go about implementing, the GFSI benchmark. So this also ties into that industry collaboration, right? So we talk about food safety is not a point of competition. And so how do we create that collaboration? And this to me seems like a great way to kind of start to create that collaboration within a media tool.
Right. No, and I think that's a really good point. And part of this is, if you're a manufacturer and you're looking at module 2, you kind of control that. Module 1, you're taking a look at that, but you really don't control it. And part of this is, let's say that you're making a deli loaf or something like this that's going to a retailer. And at retail, you have a meat slicer, and the 18-year-old kid who's working in the deli doesn't do a very good job cleaning and avoiding cross-contamination and things like this, and a recall happens. And that gets blamed on the manufacturer, who had absolutely nothing to do with that. And I think part of this, looking at this holistically, and Cortland's talking about this as well, with what he's working on for FDA's approach relative to this. Definitely, Cortland, I reach out to Austin after this and talk with him and try and align around those activities. But when I look at this as well, too, Austin, this reminds me of what FDA has been doing relative to enhanced traceability, and saying, listen, industry, for recalls and things like this, it starts at modules 4 and 5 and goes backwards to this system. And what you're doing is designed for only one forward and one back for traceability. You need to expand your viewpoint. And there's been a lot of activity around that. And FDA created a document around this and said, okay, well, this is going to be for these type of high-risk foods, and then we'll look at the other manufacturers and things like this a little farther down the line. And FDA has expanded their knowledge around this. And what happened in this space is already starting, and my prediction on this is that this would happen, and Frank Downey's posted about this. This program put out a notification and said, everybody needs to comply with this. We're not going to create different systems. So this is all growing organically relative to creating this holistic approach. And that's why I like this so much.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, and I think finding a way to make this proactive is a big element as well. And so when we've been talking about this, we're basically saying this is a film, produced by the food industry for the food industry. This is our story. This is the story that, that the journalists, typically are not going to be very interested in telling, because it's not as dramatic, but this is our story. And this is, how we create like a shared sense of camaraderie and continued, improvements within the work that we do. So yeah, actually, if you go to the next slide, we'll, I'd like to talk about kind of like what our goals are in creating something like this, because these are 4 goals are directly tied to what has previously been lacking within stories around food safety. So the first, the first goal, right, is that we want to highlight the bright spots. We want to showcase the food safety advancements that have been made. They don't get coverage. As I've been doing research for this and looking for sponsors to work with, I've learned about some super cool food safety advancements, new chemistry, for sanitation that's been coming out, new ways of farming, new ways of transportation, cooling. I mean, there's so much innovation that's really fascinating. And we want to be able to talk about that kind of stuff because this is the stuff that interests us as an industry. And then also the second goal is to make it emotional, right? Like, I mean, this goes back to why we created Sage Media in the first place, is that we, to utilize storytelling as a way to drive change and to drive new behaviors and improvements. And so the line that we always say is that if you want to drive a behavior, you have to speak to people emotionally. And if you want to speak to people emotionally, usually the easiest way to do that is through a story. And so we want to make an emotional story that shows how cool this is, but it's tying more into aspiration than it is to desperation. So this is an aspirational story, and give people within the industry, really because the target audience is the industry. So this is people who work within food or some element of food within that entire supply chain. And we talk about this a lot on the chat, right? It's not just the people touching the food. It's procurement, it's mergers and acquisitions, it's HR. All of these departments make big decisions that can affect the safety of the food. And so we want to continue to drive that conversation. What I would say is like, this is almost like my food safety culture Trojan horse. This is the largest food safety culture program I've done to date, because that's really what we're talking about here. Yeah. But give people a sense of pride, that we work in this industry. We do good work. There's always room for improvement, but we do spend a lot of time kind of berating ourselves for failures, and part of goal setting and part of continual improvement is to say, well, here's the new goal, and then once we meet that goal, celebrate the goal, and then set a new one and continue, and that's continual improvement. But there needs to be a celebration at some point in time.
Exactly. Well, the analogy that came to my mind as you were talking, Austin, is cars. Is the automotive industry doesn't say, okay, well, we're done innovating and all of the ideas we have around improving cars, we're done. We're not going to do that any longer. No, every year they come out with new things. It's like, okay, we're going to add the seatbelt into the cars to help protect you in crashes. We are going to add radar detection systems that allow the car to see what's going on around. We're going to add airbags, all of these different innovations over time. Do accidents still happen? Yes, they do. Do people criticize the auto industry to say, well, you're not producing a safe product because there's auto accidents? No, it's much more complex and nuanced than that. And with these innovations in food safety, it's the same thing. We keep figuring out new ways to improve food safety and get a better understanding over time. The automotive industry explains to the public constantly, what car brand is known for safety innovations? Volvo, right? Everybody, it's like, oh, if you want a safe car, you buy a Volvo. Volvo had an aggressive marketing campaign on their cars highlighting the safety of their cars. Right. Is that to say why don't we do something similar?
Yeah. And that's really, part of the goal. And like I said, to create this, it was a bummer to go around to these conferences this past year and see how deflated people were from poisoned, and it's like, it's great that this information is making it out to the public and that it's educating people. But man, and they also, within the editing room of because I am a filmmaker, as I'm watching these films, I watch their editing tactics and their music and how they're telling their story. And there was very creative editing choices made in that film to paint some people as villains that really did not deserve that, that image that they created. So the third goal that we're looking at is keeping it solution oriented, right? So like I said, there's a lot of documentaries out there that get you all riled up, and then there's no call to action. There's no like, well, what do I do now? And that's because the people telling the stories, they're just storytellers. They're not educators. And so we want to keep this solution oriented and empower audiences by involving them directly in food safety through this continual education program. So it's like, okay, we're going to watch this module or this chapter in the film, and then let's talk about how does that apply to us, even though we might not work in agriculture, right? Module 1 is agriculture. Well, we work in the grocery sector. Well, how does some of what we learn from there translate into what we do? And that's critical thinking. That's one of the biggest skill sets that we're constantly working on, is how do we develop critical thinking, get people to stop thinking just in their silo and say, okay, what are other people doing to solve problems? And then how can that translate into us continually improving in our own world? But also getting people to create their own goals. So we were talking about the power of goal setting. And so this is something that I do in pretty much every training program I ever create, is tie in at some point creating a SMART goal, because creating SMART goals, it provides autonomy to the learner, which is very powerful, as opposed to just saying, okay, well, here's a quiz, answer these questions to test your knowledge. Instead, I'm saying, I want you to think critically of what specifically are you going to do to improve food safety within your department or within your role. And then that's the way that we start to create, not only celebrate the successes, but also continue to improve as a result of this. And then the fourth kind of goal that we're focused on is new horizons. So new technologies, new approaches, new risks that we're seeing, right? Emerging risks is always emerging, so to speak. And so what are these opportunities that we continually have for improvement? I mean, food fraud continues to be a big issue, but there's people doing really interesting work around that. Obviously, like foreign supplier verification programs, food terrorism. I had a conversation last week with a woman who works within IT security, and I mean, she just exposed this entire world of here's what can go wrong if someone hacks into the system, and just how much of our infrastructure is connected, and how much havoc can be wreaked. And so, so also acknowledging here are the new issues that we're going to be confronted with, and what are we going to be able to do to work on that? I mean, even with as we look at climate change, that was a big topic within the Dubai food safety conference. Is like, as we start to see climate change, what are the technologies or the approaches to farming that we're starting to see happen to offset that? I mean, and there's new risks, even new biological risks that are coming up as a result of that, shorter rain seasons or longer rain seasons and all these different things. So talking about these new horizons that really will provide the opportunity for us to continue to drive the industry.
Yeah, well, I think Wanda brought up a good example here in the comments, which was cinnamon. So this has been a huge issue in the food industry right now, where there was high levels of high levels of lead in cinnamon that was used in food for young children, right? Oh boy, you talk about ticking off the boxes here, right? An emotional issue that the public has latched onto. It's something that the media can push because it's going to drive clicks. And FDA, to Cortland's point here as well, with their no margin for error policy that they're working towards. So FDA was very proactive on this. Number one, they got hit pretty hard with the infant formula issue. So they're like, okay, we're going to get ahead of this whole cinnamon issue. Went out, proactively tested products in the marketplace, found lead in other products, and told these companies to recall. So staying ahead of those new horizons. Now, part of that, from that emotional standpoint, Austin, I think is very important. Because if you're a young mother with young children and you just see the headline of cinnamon is bad, now from, in your mind, everything that contains cinnamon, gone, right? Apple pie flavored ice cream. Am I going to buy that for my children? No, that's bad. It has cinnamon in it. That person doesn't necessarily know why they linked that up in their mind, but it doesn't matter at your location if you're using cinnamon in your products, how robust your systems are as an individual company. You can't go out in the marketplace and say, okay, well, our cinnamon is okay in our products because of all these different programs. That's not going to resonate with the consumer.
Mm-mm. And that's the biggest thing, right? I mean, a recall on one product is it's brand agnostic, right? Like a recall on cantaloupe is a recall on cantaloupe. It doesn't matter who what your label is, right? I go to the grocery store, I buy cantaloupe. I have no brand, what's the word I'm looking for? Like allegiance, right? Yeah. I buy romaine lettuce. I don't know. Yeah, so now I just know, okay, romaine's out of the diet for right now. I'm going over to, iceberg and and bib. So that's, one of the things as well within this kind of story is that, as we talk about this, across the entire industry, like we all rely upon each other. And so when I talk about this kind of food safety continuum, I compare it to this relay race, right? And that each, when you look at a relay race, every runner has a specific role, right? Like your starter is not the same as your closer within a relay race. They all have specific goals, but each one of them has to be able to hand off perfectly each time to be able to achieve success at the end of the race. Mm-hmm. And that's really what we look at within the food safety continuum, is that every person has to do their job perfectly. Transportation fails at some point and the food spoils. Well, that's going to affect multiple different aspects and multiple different brands and industries. So we all rely upon each other. And that's one of the other things that I think is really interesting about this story, is because a lot of times when I'm working with companies on food safety culture, we're looking at how do we break down silos within the organization, right? Because these organizations become very siloed and then information doesn't flow in between. We don't have these conversations about how we work cohesively as a, kind of gestalt program where everything leans on each other. So that's one of the other things, is to be able to show food safety from as many different perspectives as possible. To, once again, like I said, drive that critical thinking where we go, oh, okay, I see what's going on over here. How do we start to incorporate some of that within our own department?
Good point. Yeah, and so Duncan makes a good point here as well, is that there's no all clear, right? It's a good point, Duncan. There's no announcement of, okay, guys, cinnamon issue's been taken care of. We're good. You can go back. No, it just is out there in the collective consciousness of all these people who have received this message, and it's viewed holistically. And to your point, that's what I really like about this approach, and Tim is echoing this as well, is looking at this holistically and explaining our story. It's great.
Thank you. So yeah, if you want to pull up the next slide. So yeah, I ended up reaching out to a lot of my friends, some of which are on this call right now, to say like, hey, if I was to create this type of film, what are the food safety advancements you think are notable enough to make it into this kind of story? And so here is kind of the list of the topics that came up the most often, right? We had a much longer list and we kind of boiled it down to this. And so these are some of the topics we're looking to potentially cover within the film. Would love to ask listeners right now, is there anything on here you disagree with? Anything that you're like, yep, definitely need to cover that, or anything that you feel is lacking? Because we're continually taking feedback from industry to find out what do you want to know? What areas would you like to learn more about? What do you think is worth talking about? What are your thoughts on the list there, Brian?
Yeah, no, great list. I mean, definitely, I was looking for foreign supplier verification. Right, that's a big one because to your point earlier, Austin, we're bringing in food from all over the world, and what do we really know about these suppliers? And a lot of times, these companies are moving through brokers and distributors coming into the United States, who are simply representing the company from a business standpoint. They may not even necessarily understand what's being done at that location for food safety, and switching those up. Very important to understand that. Industry collaboration, whole genome sequencing. Oh my goodness, that's huge. Yeah, sanitation. The continual improvement in these areas and what we're doing now versus what we did, 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, as we kind of opened up this chat. This is a good list, but definitely, guys, throw in here any other additional comments that you may have relative to this. I think, it's not necessarily needed for this list, but, sharing best practices is something that I think we're getting better at.
Yeah. And I think, like you said, like foreign supplier verification programs, I could see that being its own short story because it's so involved. And that's one of the things we're looking at, is that based on the success of this project and how well received it is, then we might continue to create content like this, but in shorter form that drills down into more specific topics, and continue to produce this content for the industry that showcases, here's the different advancements that are being made, and then here's how different companies are implementing this stuff to be kind of like the thought leader within that particular topic.
Yep, definitely. That's a good list.
Looking at Duncan's comment here. So I think he said, I think data-driven decision making is overrated because all data comes from the same place, the past. In a lot of cases, I think managers hide data to avoid accountability for their own managerial decisions. So sometimes,
I think a good example of what Duncan's saying there is, let's say, for example, you have an environmental monitoring program and you keep sampling the same 10 locations that you've always sampled, and the results come back negative, and you're like, oh, my job's done. And you're not looking at the new equipment that was recently installed. You're not looking at new foot traffic patterns. You're not aggressively going out to improve that data set. Data can always fool you. What's that? There's statistics, and you can make statistics say anything that you want. So are you really using that data to drive improvement?
Lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Exactly. Yeah, Megan has a good comment here as well. Food protection mindset, food safety, food defense, food fraud, to protect the supply chain. Good example. And that's a great comment, Megan. Right now, we're in an inflationary process, which means all of our, we buy our groceries and we see the bills. Food companies are scrambling to keep costs as low as they can. That has ramifications on what we do in food safety. So if the procurement group is actively going out and looking for new suppliers, that's risky in some situations, because are these people really there to provide safe ingredients for your process, or are they there to make a quick buck? You have to be very careful. But if you're under a ton of pressure to approve that new supplier, that can create a conflict of interest.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much to cover. I mean, and even with data, I think over the past, we'll say 10 to 15 years, there was this big push for big data, right? Data, all the data. And so people gathered the data, and then the question was like, well, what do I do with it now? Right? I've got terabytes of data, but I don't know what to do. And so there's interesting stuff coming out with AI, right, to analyze those massive data sets, which I think is really interesting, because then you can start to identify those trends that maybe you weren't able to see before, because the AI knows how to identify that stuff and filter through just this ridiculous amount of data.
Well, and to Duncan's point as well, it's that old saying, correlation does not equal causation. We see these things on the internet, right? So, for example, you see these ones. Is this finger shorter than this finger? If so, that means you have a higher risk of heart attack. just because that data set for a higher risk of heart attack coincidentally correlates with your finger link doesn't mean that you're going to get a heart attack because your fingers are different lengths, right? No, it's not true, right? And people read that and go, "Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay, well, correlation."
So yeah, move on to the next slide there. So those are all the food safety advancements, and then these are the opportunities for improvement that we're looking to hopefully kind of start to build upon as a result of the curriculum, as a result of people viewing the film. You know, like I said, the number one issue that comes up in conversations with people is critical thinking. Every company wants to continually develop the ability to think critically because we live in such a complex world, and the majority of the time for the issues that come up on a day-to-day basis, we don't have time to create a new training program to cover this new issue because we've never seen this issue before. And so it's like we need people to be able to think 2 or 3 steps ahead and say, okay, well, what are the repercussions that could happen as a result of me making this particular decision? From the frontline standpoint, right? Consistent adherence to GMPs. This is, you know, it's such a basic thing, and it's so prevalent that that people don't adhere to the GMPs. So that's one of the things that I'm hoping to tackle in this as well, is how can we take this story and how can we take the education aspect and hopefully increase the adherence of GMPs. I talked about siloed departmental communication earlier. How do we start to break down those silos? That's an element that we want to focus on. And then the fourth one, this was a really interesting topic, and I see a really cool opportunity here with lack of new talent in the industry. Everybody is struggling either with recruitment or retention within the industry. And I think a lot of people, as they're coming out of college or even out of high school, when you think about a job in food, right, it might be being a server, or they think of like, you know, Gordon Ramsay or, you know, something like that, or like celebrity chef. But to be able to show like this is such a massive industry. I mean, the food employees, I think it's like roughly 30% of the population globally is somehow tied into the food supply chain, right? So I mean, it's a massive employer. So to be able to say, okay, you know, maybe driving a truck would be of more interest, or working on HVAC systems, or being an HR within a manufacturing facility, or so to show the breadth of different job opportunities that are out there. So I'm almost seeing this as the opportunity to be like a recruitment film, to be able to show and take out there and say, here are the different jobs that are available, and how really fascinating this industry is. You know, a big opportunity for improvement as well that came up in these conversations was lack of structurally sound learning development, right? And I'm sure this came up because I work in learning design, and people are like, can you help us with, you know, in creating better training initiatives as a result of this. So that's one of the big things that we're trying to figure out as well. And then, like you were talking about earlier, right? Adulteration and food fraud. You know, within the spice industry, obviously, this is a really big one. And then emerging risks, listeria control, right? Listeria continually pops up as an opportunity for improvement. Hygienic design and perceived costs, right? And so looking, you know, what I would love to do is to show both, here's a greenfield project and all the cool new stuff that can go into it, but also here's how we can retrofit existing facilities to bring them up to speed. And then the final one, auditing for compliance as opposed to auditing for improvements. So how do we kind of try to up the game when it comes to auditing, and making sure that we're leveraging that as an opportunity for improvement.
Right. Wow. There is a ton packed into this slide. I've got lots of comments. So, I mean, yeah, critical thinking. One of the things that I would always beat into my quality managers' heads is your job is not to be out on the floor fixing problems. Right? If you think running around with your hair on fire and being a firefighter all day long is your job, it's not. Your job is to make the plant better. Your job is to think. I want to find you at your desk thinking about how to prevent issues from happening and developing your critical thinking skills. And it comes down to within philosophy, the branch of epistemology, how we think. There's always 3 questions tied to that. What is it? How do I know? Right? And the third one, what you're talking about, what do I do about it? Right? Because knowledge without action is, if you sit in your office all day long as a quality person, looking up and Googling all the cool things that are being done with AI, and you're not actually executing anything against that, you're wasting time. You have to execute. Looking at this list, auditing for compliance versus improvement. Yeah. We always complain in the food industry, Austin, about, FDA is just checking the box and they're just going on a list. Well, if we're doing that too, we're just as guilty.
True. So yeah, and so we'd love to also hear from some of y'all out there on what are some other like big opportunities for improvement that we might be able to include either within the story or within the education aspect of this initiative. Because like I said, we're still gathering information and thoughts and opinions from the industry. So this is your chance to kind of throw some stuff out there that might be included within this.
Yeah, Duncan's making some really good comments here. So relative to what you had commented on, Austin, relative to recruitment, you don't go to college in most instances to major in what we do. You kind of fall into it. It's like, and you don't hear little kids saying, what do you want to be, Johnny? Oh, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be a policeman. I want to be a food safety professional. No, it doesn't come up. So we're at a disadvantage. We have to be actively speaking and getting our message out there and showing how important this career path is. We all eat. Food is not going away, right? This is a good industry to work in.
Mm-hmm.
Great comments, Austin.
Yeah.
Very good comments. Yeah, excellent.
And then
that's the last. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So yeah, so that's the oh, did I lose you there?
Oh, I'm here.
So yeah, so that's that's the long and the short of the project, and then yeah. So as of right now, kind of we're in the fundraising phase of everything, because it is a pretty ambitious project. I don't know of anything that's ever been attempted like this within the food industry, to bring multiple companies and organizations together all to the same table to be able to share a story. Because as we bring in more sponsors, each sponsor is going to have a different contributing aspect to talk about within the film. So we'll be kind of sculpting it as we, so quote unquote, building the plane as we fly it, type of thing.
Exactly.
But yeah, so what we're looking, we're looking at probably raising about 1.2 million to be able to produce this entire thing. And so that's where we're turning to industry and asking industry for sponsorship. And so, we have different levels of sponsorship, and each level of sponsorship correlates to essentially how much screen time we have to talk about the advancements that you've made, the whatever process that you're currently using that you want to share, so that we can create that kind of shared environment of sharing knowledge within the food industry in general. So anybody that's out there that thinks that there's a company or your own company that might be interested in participating, definitely send me an email, austin@sage.media. And then once we get the money raised, we have a pretty aggressive production timeline, and that's where the really fun stuff starts. And because this is going to be a global story, I think just visually it's going to be very exciting. We'll be able to kind of showcase companies from all over the world. We have a company we're talking to in the Middle East, one in Latin America, a couple of North American companies, one in South Africa. So it almost kind of even turn into a travel log to be able to show just like how all these different continents tie together, whether their food is going to their own home base or if it's being transported out somewhere else. So I think that aspect of the production will be very interesting.
Wow. Very, very cool. And I mean, so number one, thank you, Austin, for doing this. And I think part of the reason you're being successful in this field and doing these type of things is number one, you bring fresh eyes to what's being done. You're able to bring your expertise into this and create new ways of approaching these issues. Because as we talk about here on the chat as well, the old-fashioned way of trying to teach information to people in the plants or wherever via PowerPoints doesn't work, right? When do you sit down at home to relax at the end of an evening to watch a series of PowerPoints? No, we watch stories. We watch Law and Order, and we want to see the process of how the killer is caught and the struggles that the prosecutor goes through and the emotion of the family with the victim. And then in the end, getting the bad guy and telling that story. And I think that's one of the more important things that you're bringing to this industry is the ability to tell those stories. And the days of, okay, well, we'll just keep our head down. We'll do what we need to do, and then hope to God that nothing happens that impacts us are over. We can't operate that way.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and what we've been talking about it, right? If we don't tell the story, nobody else will, right? It's our responsibility to create our own story and to be able to share this. So yeah, I mean that's and like you said, we don't go home and watch PowerPoints, and so I think this is a really powerful way to communicate within the industry what it is that we're doing and how we can continue to grow. And then if best case scenario, we create the film, we start to put it out into some film festivals, while we're distributing it within the industry, right? I want to be able to play it. We're talking to conferences, right? So GFSI, IAFP, Food Safety Summit, all the different conferences to see, would it make sense for us to do a screening at those conferences and then kind of create a debrief option as well. Because I thought that was a missed opportunity with Poisoned, was that I was hoping that we would go to these conferences and that we would be able to watch the film at the conference, kind of like going to the movies, right? And then debrief and talk about it as a collective group. That didn't happen at any of the conferences I went to. And so I would love to be able to get this into the conferences so we can watch this collectively and then kind of have a workshop around it. And then, and then find out, long term, is Netflix interested in this? Would Hulu or some other distribution platform be interested? I don't know. That's one of the things that some of our sponsors are asking us about, and I'm not able to make that guarantee, right? Because I don't know if this will be dramatic enough for Netflix or Hulu, but it might be, right? Because there's lots of great content out there that is not super dramatic, right? I think about the series How It's Made, right? That was a really big series on, I think it was PBS or BBC, and really fascinating. People loved it, but it wasn't as high stakes as like a Poisoned or a Food Inc. was. So we'll see about the large scale distribution once we have it made, and it's kind of a backwards process. So a lot of these documentaries that are put out on Netflix, they're financed by Netflix, right? And we didn't want this financed by the distribution company, because then they have too much control over the story, and we want to tell our story, not the story that a production company or a distribution company thinks we should be telling.
Right, because they don't know it. It's ours. So I was thinking of some positive examples in the industry where they've been able to kind of make these messages. So think like the organic industry in food. They were able to put out a positive message to the industry and to the consumers of, here's the things we do with organic food that make it better. We have these growing practices, and here's how we take care of our animals, and you have to adhere to these standards. And in the minds of the consumer, Austin, organic is good. Organic is better. Then they're not quite sure why, but they know that organic is better in some ways. So this can be done.
Oh, definitely. And and that's one of the things that I would like to address as well, is like, what does organic mean when we're talking about food safety, right? Because we saw with I'm drawing a blank on the name of that delivery service, but it was the leek crumbles that went into that soup.
Yeah, the taro. Yeah.
Yeah, and but I remember that there was one of the people who got sick was quoted as saying, like, I knew I was buying an organic product, so I thought it would be safe, and so she was equating organic to safe, and those are two totally different worlds.
Right. It's always crazy how that works. Daily Harvest. Thank you, Megan. I knew somebody would get that.
There it is. Daily Harvest.
Yeah. Perfect. So in keeping with, as we kind of close out our chat here for today, one of those key points, Austin, that you made is call to action, right? You need to take action to make things happen. So reaching out to you at austin@sage.media is a great way to get that process started. You may not be the right person in your company, but you are the right person to make introductions. And within that, and in the food industry, we're all very, very connected. Once you're at a certain level in the food industry within a particular sector, you pretty much know all the other leadership at the other companies in that space. And when you go to a conference, it's not 6 degrees Kevin Bacon of separation thing. It's usually 1 degree of separation. When you talk with a new person at a conference that you meet, very quickly you will find that you have a common person that you both know very, very quickly. We're a very small community, and we need to support each other. And this, I think, is an extremely important way to do that. And I want to see this get made. This is really important to do. And thank you, Austin, for stepping up.
Definitely. Yeah. It's a bit ambitious, but I figure we go big or go home. Right. So, yeah. So anybody out there, I mean, we're even talking to small, independent consultants, because, the independent consultant probably doesn't have the money to sponsor this, but they have clients that have great case studies, so, I have a call later today with a farm that has been doing some really cool stuff in updating their IT infrastructure. So that lead came from an independent contractor that specializes in IT. So yeah, we're really looking for just introductions wherever we can find them, so that we can bring in as many interested.
Amazing. Awesome. So that's a perfect way to close our chat for today. If the comments and the interaction we got here in our chat today, Austin, or any indicator, we're getting lots of interest around that. And so thank you, everybody. Amazing comments. And so, of course, Duncan, like normal, is on fire. Appreciate the comments, Duncan. Megan, thank you, everybody, for joining for today. Fantastic chat. Thank you as well, Austin, for everything that you do. So with that, guys, we'll bring our chat to a close here for this week. Think about this offline. Think about what it is that you can do to help move this forward. It's that important. And join us next week for the next food safety chat at the same time. Join us at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern. And again, we live stream on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So choose your favorite media for that. And we'll join you next week. So in the meantime, have a great weekend. Enjoy yourself and take care of food next week again, just like you always do. And have a great one. Thanks, Austin. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you.